I'm Adam with Nautel Customer Service. I'm going to do a quick video today to outline what to expect when unboxing your new VS transmitter. It should come packaged in a box similar to this, so you want to remove all the tape from the top so you can open it up and get at what's inside. First thing you'll notice is a cutout. That'll contain a USB drive with all your handbooks and documentation material. Set that aside, don't lose it, it's a good reference for later. Taking off that top layer of packaging, you can see several items in here. One, we have a box containing all the ferrites we'll need to use for our cabling installations. We'll set that aside. There'll be an ancillary kit, which will have some spare components as well as connectors for remote inputs and outputs. There's an installation kit, which contains all the hardware and cabling we'll need for our basic installation. There's the quick start guide, which is that'll be our guide as we go through setting this up and putting it together. So we'll put that where we'll be able to reference it later. And each transmitter will come with a safety document as well as that transmitter's proof of performance. So keep those for reference. Now also on this level we have our actual rack mount pieces. There's two small portions that are for the front of the transmitter. And there'll be two sets of two larger portions that are for the rear side. So we'll set those all carefully aside. Take off this top layer of foam. You can see we have the transmitter itself as well on either side. We have our rack slide assemblies, and we'll need those coming up, so we'll set those safely to the side as well. All that's left to do now is to remove the transmitter itself and set this packaging aside, and we can get started putting it together. First step in putting it all together is to put together our rack slide assembly. I've got the quick guide out for a reference, and from it I've pulled all the hardware that I'll need to do this step. So we'll start by taking this center portion, which has a U profile. There's a notch at one end and several grooves that run the entire length. We're going to put that together with the smallest piece, and it goes on the end with the notch. So we'll just fit it together so that the edges of the U fold up as well as the panel on the front folds up. And we'll just take a flat washer and then a split washer and a nut, and we'll tighten this down. We'll do the same for the other bolt here. Flat washer, split washer, and then a nut. Just take a wrench to make sure they're good and tight. That's good. We can set that down. We take the other large portion that has one center groove and a curved tab at the one end. We're going to position that so that the curved tabs are facing away from each other, and that it slides through from the same side as the front. So we'll come in from the back, fit it in, and we'll put again a flat washer, a split washer, and a nut. And another flat washer, another split washer, and then one more nut. The back half we'll want to leave loose so that we can adjust it to fit the depth of our rack, which is something we'll have to do before we move to the next step. I've gone ahead and tightened this assembly up after having measured it in the rack. You can see there's not a lot of space in between the two portions, and it is exactly the right depth for my rack setup. So if we take the sliders that we took out earlier, and if you extend them, you notice it's basically in three portions. There's a skinny part, medium part, and then the largest part. At the end of the smallest portion, there's this black tab, and by depressing that, it'll actually remove from the others. So we'll take that, we'll set it aside. We need that in a later step, but for now we're just going to focus on this two piece. Now there's two holes at the front of your mount assembly that we'll need to coordinate with two holes on the front of the slide. We'll lay them together. You may have to adjust the slide pieces to get good visibility to your hole, but there's mine there. Using the hardware referenced in the quick guide, first take a bolt and slide that down through the hole. And then if we flip it over, we can put a flat washer, followed by a split washer, followed by a nut. We'll snug that down. And here you can see why it's important to have the notch on the right end, because there's another hole there that we have to line up. We flip back over and adjust the slide to get good visibility. You can see there it is. So we'll take another bolt, slide that through the hole, and flip over, or another flat washer, another split washer, and one more nut. And there we go. If I look to the back, I've got a couple possible places I could put them. I'll use this hole because it's nice and snug. So again, I'll just slide a bolt through from this side, flip it over, we'll install a flat washer, split washer, and then a nut. Tighten that down. And one last hole at the back, so we'll put in the fourth bolt, another flat washer, one more split washer, and then a nut. Once they're installed, you can tighten them down so that they're good and secure. Just repeat the same process for the other side, and you'll have your rack slide assemblies completely put together. I've been working with VS300 hardware so far, and there are a couple differences with the VS1 and VS2.5, but they are fundamentally the same. There's still a small piece that will be for the front. There'll be a piece with several long grooves running the entire length, as well as having that U profile. There's also still a notch at the front of it, so they line up the same way. And then the largest portion with a single groove is for the rear. Assembly is the same across them all. There's just an extra set of hardware. As you can see, you've got 4 bolts instead of 2 on the VS1 and the VS2.5. Now in a case where you have a rack that is particularly deep, you'll notice there's quite a gap between the rear piece and the front piece. And it may be possible that you have to fasten the slider through this middle portion. You want to take one of the included spacer washers and just place it at the right location, and you feed your bolt through that, and that'll prevent this whole assembly from bowing and potentially causing binding. With the rack portion of the rack mounts together, all that's left to do is to attach this third piece of the slider assembly to the side of the transmitter itself here. Now there is a front and a back to this portion, and it's important to know the difference to get it on the right way. This part at the back has a black hook, and that goes towards the rear of the transmitter. There's another portion with a curved tab, and that'll go towards the front. You can see there's 3 holes in the side of the transmitter, and they'll correspond to 3 holes on the slide assembly. So if we lay it down carefully and line everything up, from the quick guide we can get the correct hardware that we need. And I'll just go ahead and secure this in place. Just in case of screwing in the one screw for the middle, another one goes at the back, and then finally there's a third one that goes up front. Those in place and tightened down, we can flip the whole transmitter over and do the same thing on the other side, making sure to have the hook go at the rear of the transmitter and to have the curved tab go up towards the front. Otherwise it won't mount into the rack properly when the time comes. We're ready now to install the completed slide assemblies into the rack itself. I've got this side finished up, but I haven't finished on this side. Now you notice on the VS300 there are 2 holes on either side of this front piece. The outside 2 holes are used to secure the slide assembly to the rack itself, and the inside 2 are used to secure the transmitter in place once it's installed. Now I'm using an unthreaded rack, so I'm going to have to use these threaded inserts. They just clip in place in front of the appropriate holes. Make sure everything lines up clearly. Just put the second one in place there. That all looks good. So then taking the appropriate hardware, just begin threading that in. If you're using a threaded rack, this step is not necessary. You just want to mount everything flush with the edge of the rack and you'll be good. For the VS1 and the VS2.5, they always mount flush front and rear. I've got a nut placed in behind so that when the bolt comes through the hole I can capture it in place and secure it down. And there it is. Get that tightened up. This top one is most of the way finished, so it'll just be a case of doing a final tighten on it. There we go, that's good. They're both nice and snug. So now we're ready to install the transmitter itself. A note on the VS1 and VS2.5 assemblies. As you can see, there's only one hole on each side of this front piece. That is used to secure the slide assembly to the rack itself, and then you use the threaded inserts at the appropriate spacing to mount the transmitter itself. And again, the VS1 and the VS2.5, they will always mount flush with the edge of the rack, whether it is threaded or unthreaded. Once the slide assemblies are installed in the rack, it's a pretty straightforward task to put the transmitter itself onto them. Simply extend the sliders all the way out. Make sure they're in place where they need to be. Just take the transmitter and you want to carefully line up both sides to make sure that they sit properly. Looks like all good here. You just slide it right in. And it's a good idea to pull it back out and make sure that everything has latched correctly, because we did take these two pieces apart before. And as you can see, they've latched securely on both sides and it's nice and tight. If you want to remove it again, it's simply a case of depressing those black tabs on both sides, and then everything will slide through for you. If we look now to the rear of the transmitter, you can see that all the input and output connections are located along this back panel. Starting from the right, there's the main AC breaker for AC on and AC off, input connection for 200 to 240 volts AC, 50 or 60 hertz single phase input, a ground stud below that for connection to a station reference ground. This RJ45 connector is to be used for all networking purposes. Below that are two USB ports. We have an MPX balanced or unbalanced input. The balanced or unbalanced selection is made by a jumper inside the transmitter. You have two SCA inputs on BNC connectors. You have an RDS input as well as an analog audio input. There's a pilot sample as well as a 10 megahertz input connection located here. AES EBU is through this XLR connector. The remote input and output connections are done through these two ports. There's an RF drive input for use with external exciters. This RJ45 connector is to be used in conjunction with the VSHD system and is not to be used for any networking purposes. RF output to the antenna system is located here. And beside that we have an RF monitor port as well as an RF sample output. Now there is an internal interlock system in these transmitters that must be defeated if you wish to produce RF. That can be done by connecting to an appropriate interlock circuit in your antenna or perhaps on a key lock, or it can be defeated using an included jumper as outlined in the quick guide manual under the installing interlock section. What you must do is connect the included jumper to pins 19 and 20 of this top connector. The first pin on the left on the top row is pin 1, the first pin on the left on the bottom row is pin 14, so you must simply count over to pin 19 and also to pin 20. Connect the jumper, and the interlock is defeated. I've been working with the VS300 so far, but there are some differences between the VS300, the VS1, and the VS2.5 that are worth pointing out. Here I have a VS1, and we'll notice that the RF monitor and the RF sample outputs are not located in the left corner as they are on the 300. They are instead here towards the right. We have the RF monitor and RF sample output. There's a slight difference in the transmitter link and the external RF input as compared to the 300. As well, your output flange will be different than it would be on a 300. It'll be larger and possibly a different type depending on your order configuration. Beyond that, your AC input and station reference ground connection, network, USB, all of your audio inputs, the remote input and output ports remain in the same configuration, just shifted slightly to the side. Looking at a VS2.5, like I have here, we can see there's additional differences between it and the 300 we looked at previously. To start, we have the RF monitor port and the RF sample port are again not in the top left corner on this unit. They are instead down at the bottom, the connector on the right being the RF monitor port, the one on the left being our RF sample out. We have the output connector flange, that's different again. Size and type will depend on your order configuration. Most notable difference is on the right here with the AC setup. Instead of the normal connector and switch that we've seen on the previous two models, the VS2.5s come with a 3-wire connector system, a larger breaker, as well as an AC present indicator which illuminates when power is available. Outside of those, though, your station reference ground stud remains the same. Your network and USB connections are as they have been. Audio connections, as well as your remote input and output, and the transmitter link and RF input from VSHD systems remain all in pretty much the same layout. It's important to note, though, that on any VS series transmitter, that interlock jumper on pin 19 and 20 must be made, otherwise you will not be able to produce any RF power.